The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Olmstead in Massachusetts, Think Outside the Facility, offered by the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators. I'm Carrie Bennett, Chair of NASHIA's Training and Education Committee, and Gabriela Lawrence Soto is our webinar organizer. Thank you for joining us. If you're unfamiliar with NASHIA, we are a nonprofit organization created to assist state government in promoting partnerships and building systems to meet the needs of individuals with brain injury and their families. A GoToWebinar user guide is available for download from the NASHIA website. This is a great resource for making the most of your live webinar experiences. A handout of today's presentation is available for download. Check your attendee control panel for the handouts pane. To ask a question during the webinar, please enter it in the questions pane on your control panel, and our organizer will forward your question to our speaker after the presentation if time allows. If we run out of time, the presenter will respond to your question via email. Today's webinar will highlight the actions taken by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts after 2 class action lawsuits were settled in favor of plaintiffs with brain injury seeking community living in lieu of institutional services. Our objectives today are to explain the Olmstead lawsuits in Massachusetts, identify actions taken in the state to meet court decisions, and to explain how home and community-based service programs and initiatives lead to community integration. We have a couple of poll questions for you. If you will launch those polls, thank you, Gabby. The first question is, are you familiar with the Olmstead decision? We'd like for you to enter your answers, yes or no, and then we'll take this poll. Gabby, what does our audience say? Looks like most of you are familiar with the Olmstead decision. That's great. Well, you'll learn a lot more today. What's our second question, Gabby? I think that's the first question again. We need the second question. Yes. Are you involved with a brain injury home and community-based service waiver program? Please select yes or no and let us know. And Gabby, what did our audience have to say? Split almost half and half. Well, good. Those of you that are unfamiliar or not involved with a home and community-based waiver program will have a lot to learn today. And those of you that are familiar will have a lot to review. Wonderful. Thank you, Gabby. And now I'm very pleased, Now I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker, Sandy Biber, the Director of Community-Based Services for the Massachusetts Rehabilitation Commission. Sandy has a master's degree in clinical psychology, is licensed as a rehabilitation counselor and as a mental health counselor. She worked in community services in Texas and Massachusetts for 38 years. She now works for the State Rehabilitation Agency, managing community programs for individuals with brain injuries and other disabilities. Welcome, Sandy.
Good afternoon. Thank all of you for joining us, and I've enjoyed looking at Olmstead and doing the research, and hopefully you will find this interesting. So we need to start with Olmstead. Who or what is the Olmstead decision? In Massachusetts, the first Olmstead one thinks of is this guy, known nationally for his beautifully landscaped parks that enhance their locality. However, this really isn't our story. I would urge you, however, to take a minute and take a look at the very final paragraph. His heart was really with us many, many years earlier than our current time. Okay, sorry, having a little technical difficulty. All right, here we go. So Olmstead is the foundation of much of the deinstitutionalization that's come about in the last 20 years. Take a look at the date of the decision and take a look at the words in italics. We'll be discussing those later on. So what is Olmstead? This is a very, very good reference. I would encourage all of you to take a look at it at your own time. Current reality or history. Take a look at the quotation above and see if you can think about when this might have been written. This sounds very current. And in fact, it is. When people with disabilities started to move out to the community, we're all aware it's been a long, slow process. Olmstead was 17 years ago, but this is still current in our lives. We all work in rehabilitation in some fashion, and because of that, we know in the core of our beings that the history we all experience shapes our present. Let's take a look at our history. So this is a very familiar story. People in a facility wanting to live in the community and unable to find services. The two women who became the plaintiffs, the prime plaintiffs in the Olmstead decision, were Lois Curtis and Elaine Wilson. They both spent time going in and out of facilities. Staff were clear that they were able to manage in the community, and then they would return because they were unable to find any kind of treatment and support in the community. The two women asked for help getting treatment in the community with the support of their providers, and there was nothing available. They waited for years for community-based supports to be set up. The Olmstead decision opened the door for individuals to return to the community to live and work with the greatest autonomy possible with supports. The Georgia court ordered that the Georgia Department of Human Resources was to place plaintiffs in an appropriate community-based treatment program, and that their failure to do so violates Title II of the ADA. The Georgia defendants appealed to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, and the case moved on from Georgia to the nation when the Supreme Court agreed to hear the appeal. Look at the date. The case was heard in the Supreme Court on April 21st, 1999. It's always interesting when thinking about something that happened a while ago to see what else was going on in the world. The day before this case was heard was Columbine, the Columbine High School massacre. Olmstead was heard by the Supreme Court on the 21st. The Supreme Court answered with a very strong but qualified yes and affirmed the case for the plaintiffs. When treatment professionals determine that community placement is appropriate, when the individual does not oppose being served in the community, and when the placement is a reasonable accommodation when balanced with the needs of others with disabilities, then a community placement is required. This is indeed a very strong decision. This beautiful picture is Lois Curtis showing some of her artwork. Take a minute and look at her words and her wishes for people who are still in facilities and getting ready to move into the community. Okay, let's take another look at the Supreme Court ruling. Community placement is required when professionals determine that the placement is appropriate, when the individual wants to be in the community or at least does not oppose it, and when the placement is a reasonable accommodation when balanced with the needs of others. That third bullet is really the heart of most of the legal action that has happened since Olmstead, when the placement is a reasonable accommodation when balanced with the needs of others with disabilities. The court majority stated essentially that a state would be able to show that in considering available resources, immediate relief for the plaintiffs would be inequitable, given the responsibility the state has for the care and treatment of a large and diverse population of people with mental disabilities. So to think about this a little bit, I think many, if not all of us, would agree that if you had all of the resources in the world in terms of funding and staff, we could probably serve anyone in the community. However, I don't think any of us have ever run into having enough resources to provide every single thing to everyone who wants to be in the community. So this is a balance. Olmstead does require a balance. Okay, let's take a look at how Olmstead interacts with Medicaid. This is a report or excerpts from a report by the Kaiser Family Foundation. And this stated that Olmstead is not a Medicaid case. However, the decision alters neither the individual entitlement nor state's basic legal obligations. The ruling does lay out the requirements of the ADA with regard to community placement. The report noted that the court dismissed as irrelevant to its ruling assertions by the state's lawyers that Medicaid favored the financing of institutional care. Because Medicaid is such an important source of financing for both institutional and community-based services for people with disabilities, the focus on Medicaid as a source of funding for deinstitutionalization is an inevitable byproduct of the Olmstead decision. And down at the bottom of the page, there is a link to find this report. So in brief, no changes were made to Medicaid law as a result of Olmstead. And the home and community-based waivers offer an opportunity to move Medicaid services for individuals into the community. Olmstead really focused on the setting rather than on looking at funding. It is true, however, that Medicaid structurally leans towards institutional care. The home and community-based waiver services offered and continue to offer a way of finding funding for individuals who are moving from the institution to the community. After Olmstead, things began to move. Court rulings confirm that Olmstead applies across the country and across institutional settings. Lawsuits that came up generally reached written decisions in favor of individuals with disabilities. The court made it clear that Olmstead applied to all states and all Medicaid-funded institutions, including nursing facilities. And the third bullet will come up later when we discuss some of the Massachusetts Olmstead-related rulings. So the courts found that Olmstead applied to individuals living in the community, not in institutions, but in the community who are at risk of institutionalization. The United States Justice Department made Olmstead a priority of its Civil Rights Division, and began to enforce the Supreme Court mandate in state after state after 2009. 10 years after the Olmstead decision, President Obama proclaimed that 2009 was the year of community living. The Olmstead ruling was a critical step forward for our nation, articulating one of the most fundamental rights of Americans with disabilities, having the choice to live independently. The words of President Obama marked the beginning of a period of increased activity and movement towards community. This included the ACL. ACL was born as part of the Obama administration's response to Olmstead. Why were state-specific Olmstead plans developed? In the Olmstead decision, the court required states to provide services in the most integrated setting and indicated that in order to do so, each state should develop an Olmstead plan to demonstrate efforts in order to be consistent with the ruling. In each state, things began to stir up after Olmstead. In Massachusetts, Olmstead planning was initiated in 2007 and completed in 2008. And you should see in your screens now 2 quotes from the Massachusetts Olmstead Plan. The Olmstead Plan was known as Community First, and these are the goals of the Community First Olmstead Plan. Massachusetts realized that the system was going to need to change in order for the vision to become reality. Note particularly the second, third, and fourth bullets, all focused on preparing the community services and supports necessary for people to move from institutional settings into the community. The principles of the Olmstead Plan in Massachusetts have really formed the shape of community services here. These were the steps planned in Massachusetts Olmstead. Of these, only the Community First waiver didn't happen. Later with Hutchinson, Massachusetts applied for the Money Follows the Person Demonstration Grant, which provided a similar opportunity to build community systems. So we have 3 legal actions listed here. Actually 4 if you include Olmstead. 3 of them in Massachusetts: Boulet, Rolland, and Hutchinson. Boulet versus Cellucci was primarily a push for funding services that would allow individuals in the community to access community services. This relates to the court's ruling that Olmstead applied to all individuals with disabilities who are not able to access community services, not just to individuals in the facilities. So this is our timeline, how things followed one after the other. Let's take a closer look at Rolland and Hutchinson, but we're actually going to start with Boulet. Boulet and Rolland were the first 2 Olmstead-related actions in Massachusetts, followed closely by Hutchinson. As said earlier, we're going to focus on Rolland and Hutchinson. Kathy Hutchinson is the first named plaintiff in the Hutchinson lawsuit. We'll hear a little bit more about her later. This case, the Boulet case, is an example of the interaction between Medicaid and Olmstead that use of Medicaid funding to provide community care for persons with disabilities is a consequence of Olmstead. So in Massachusetts, there were a number of people who were living with families as institutions began to close. However, there was a long waiting list for services for these individuals. Families like the Boulet family waited and waited. Boulet revolved around the need to find financing for individuals to receive community services. Boulet allowed individuals in the community at risk of institutionalization to enter expanded home and community-based waiver services, allowing them to move out of their parents' homes and into the community. Boulet versus Cellucci was settled in December 2000. The settlement agreement included 2,437 people then on a DDS, Department of Developmental Services, waiting list, but did not include those who were waitlisted after July 14, 2000. The agreement committed the state to spending nearly $126 million between fiscal years 2002 and 2006. The funds were to be spent to provide out-of-home placements to people it covered, to provide interim services while they waited. And the agreement was strong enough to require that funds were requested each year in order to make sure that this would be successfully concluded. In 2000, Boulet was concluded with people moving off waiting lists and into services. Okay, let's move to Rolland. Boulet primarily involved individuals living with aging parents who needed community services. Rolland revolved around the need for community services for individuals in nursing facilities. Like the Olmstead plaintiffs, the contention was that the plaintiffs could be served in the community if funds were redirected to pay for community care. So this was named after Loretta Rolland. Paul Cellucci, the named defendant, was the governor of Massachusetts. Rolland was a class action lawsuit, and there was an initial settlement in 1999 that required that community placement would be provided to 1,100 people, that those individuals would receive specialized services and active treatment while they were in the facility. After several findings of noncompliance with the terms of the settlement, the district court adopted CMS's active treatment standards, appointed a court monitor, and approved a detailed monitoring protocol. These are the CMS active treatment standards. And if you look at them, an individual program plan, program implementation, these begin to require community services much more than services provided to people in skilled nursing facilities. So active treatment is designed to really provide community level treatment to people who are in institutions. The second settlement agreement for Rolland required that individuals were placed within a specified time period or else active treatment was to be provided. The settlement was overseen by a court monitor. Monitoring was a very effective tool. It required that the staff working with Rolland class members to help them move out of facilities do very careful and meticulous oversight of the care and treatment that individuals were getting in the facility, provide specialized service providers and active treatment care coming from outside vendors. This all ended in the individuals receiving excellent active treatment and really making some strides forward while they were still in facility. So we've now gone from 1,100 to 1,750 class members. It's interesting to note that many of the plaintiffs did not really need skilled nursing care, but required help with basic daily activities. The case was dismissed in May 2013 after a finding of substantial compliance with both the first and second settlement agreements. Rolland closed after years spent developing community placements and individual placements for individuals in their own homes and in group homes. Today, vigilance continues, ensuring that individuals entering nursing facilities with developmental or intellectual disabilities begin discharge treatment planning immediately. And this is Loretta Rolland. She moved out in 2002, 11 years ahead of the settlement closing. This is her as she leaves the court after the settlement was dismissed. This brings us to Hutchinson versus Patrick. I will note that Hutchinson is still an active case. The statements that you can see on your screen are taken from documents that the plaintiff counsel filed with the court. The first paragraph is a quote that they provided from the Olmstead decision. Note how the plaintiff counsel went straight back to Olmstead. So this is the beginning of Hutchinson. 5 named plaintiffs, the Brain Injury Association of Massachusetts and Stavros Center for Independent Living, sued the Commonwealth for community-based individualized care. On June 2, 2008, a landmark settlement was reached that enabled individuals with acquired brain injuries to move out of nursing facilities and into the community. This is Kathy Hutchinson. Kathy and individuals like her, individuals with brain injuries, were often housed in nursing homes as an efficient, in quotes, way to meet their care needs. Look at Kathy's words. This is a beautiful video of Kathy arriving at her house after she moved out of the nursing facility, and I would encourage all of you to find it and to watch it. It's a very short video. And Kathy still lives in the home she moved into as part of the ABI residential habilitation waiver. So let's talk a little bit about those waivers. As part of the settlement, the Commonwealth agreed to apply for home and community-based service waivers. An application was submitted to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid for 2 HCBS 1915C waivers. The Acquired Brain Injury Residential Habilitation Waiver, or ABI-RH, the Acquired Brain Injury Non-Residential Habilitation Waiver, or ABI-N. The applications were approved and the waivers opened on May 1st, 2010. The new waivers were targeted specifically to support discharge of individuals with acquired brain injury from nursing facilities and rehabilitation hospitals. Case management, the provider network, all of the providers who served the individuals in the community, eligibility, and application processing were all managed by the University of Massachusetts Medical School, Disability and Community Services. Mass Rehab provided operations support and oversight on behalf of Mass Health. So, what's happened so far to the Hutchinson Settlement? We ran into some barriers. Slots were hard to fill, particularly ABIN. Some of the barriers involved maintaining cost neutrality, which all of you, I believe, know is one of the terms of the HCBS waivers. The availability of informal support for individuals with brain injuries wanting to move home, and trying to understand exactly what being safely served in the community meant. This goes back to one of the provisions in Olmstead that the providers are able to determine that someone is able to be served in the community. So this was a new waiver with no history and experience. People were very cautious in determining waiver eligibility. For the residential waivers, because the slots filled slowly, it was very hard to group individuals together into one residential program. So residential programs in Massachusetts were generally 4-person homes. If you take a look at the diagram on this, we have 2 females represented by F and 2 males represented by Southeast, or represented by M. 2 of the individuals, 1 male and 1 female, want to live in the southeast part of the state. 1 male wants to live in the northeast part of the state, and 1 woman wants to live in the western part of the state. If you throw in a further variable that one of the women is willing to live with men and the other is not, you can see just by looking at this diagram that for these 4 people, you're going to need at least 3 and possibly 4 different group home settings. Placement was slow. In 2013, the plaintiffs requested that the settlement agreement of 2008 be revisited. An amended settlement agreement was reached in 2013. And that is our current settlement agreement. It ends on June 30th, 2019, if it is agreed that the Commonwealth has met the terms of the settlement. The agreement included an application for 2 new waivers, moving forward plan residential supports, MFPRS, and moving forward plan community living. I should note that the waivers were originally named for the demonstration grant that was applied for at the same time as the waivers. Demonstration enrollment ended in August 2016. The last demo participants transitioned in January 2017. While we are still following some demo participants in the community, for all practical purposes, the demonstration is almost done. Having the waivers with the same name as the demonstration, money follows the person, having the waivers continue and the demonstration end, has been very problematic. All of us involved in Hutchinson have found ourselves explaining and reassuring families and staff and participants that the waivers were still alive and well, and that yes, you were going to be able to come out of the nursing home. So after some thought, Mass Health determined that it would be a wise idea to rename the waivers. And we have just started that process, so they are now our moving forward waivers. So again, the settlement terms included the waivers, included the money follows the person demonstration. It also included a 1915B waiver, which allowed MFP participants access to behavioral health services. This was applied for by the Commonwealth and was approved. Mass Health delegated responsibility for outreach, which was part of the settlement, to the transition entities who were involved in the MFP demonstration, the Aging Service Access Points, or ASAPs, and independent living centers, ILCs. The demonstration allowed Massachusetts to expand its existing commitment to support community living for frail elders and for people with disabilities across their lifespan, and provided Massachusetts with an increased rate of federal funding to allow us to develop community services. As was discussed earlier, the demonstration was in many ways the successor to Community First. The demonstration supported a huge movement of individuals from facilities to the community. For many demonstration participants, enrollment in one of the 4 facility-to-community waivers provided the ongoing services and case management that would be necessary for them to be able to remain in the community long after their year of demonstration services ended. So the transition entities involved in the demonstration, the ASAPs and ILCs, enrolled individuals in skilled nursing facilities into the demonstration and frequently, as needed, helped them apply for waivers. As noted earlier, the transition entities initially carried out the outreach responsibilities that MassHealth had accepted as part of the second Hutchinson Settlement. Slots for the ABI waivers reopen each year in May. In May 2016, the 5th year of the settlement began with enough leftover slots that had not been filled, that the requirement for a family-to-family and peer-to-peer outreach program, as noted in the second bullet above, kicked in. Other settlement terms. Waiver responsibilities were divided. Application management, initial eligibility, and provider network services were all retained by the UMass Medical School. Residential waivers were operated by Department of Developmental Services, and the community waivers were operated by the Mass Rehab Commission. So we have MassHealth, which is the Massachusetts Medicaid agency, the Department of Developmental Services, the University of Massachusetts Medical School, and the Massachusetts Rehabilitation Commission, all involved in different aspects of making these waivers work. In August 2017, the 2 state agencies, the Mass Rehab Commission and the Department of Developmental Services, assumed responsibility for leading outreach to skilled nursing facilities. This included establishment of a family-to-family, peer-to-peer program to support potential applicants in understanding and applying for the waivers. Today, we have a 75-person team, including case managers, supervisors, and program managers visiting approximately 400 nursing facilities each quarter. I should note that the visits are at least quarterly. More frequently, they are monthly. We've also worked with about 35 peer mentors and families to help them prepare for supporting applicants who would like to hear from individuals who have lived through the experience, what it's like outside of the facility. As part of this process, we've created short videos of several of the peer mentors. We've reached out to our stakeholder group to provide valuable feedback for us on how to best reach out to applicants. The stakeholders very patiently spent most of one meeting explaining to us that you can hear in the background perhaps a siren, welcome to Boston. So the stakeholders spent one day very patiently explaining to us that when someone said, no, thank you, I don't want to hear about this waiver, it might mean no, and it might also mean that someone was scared, that someone thought that their family wouldn't want them to move out, or that someone had just given up on the possibility of that actually happening. We developed and provided training to staff who support the peer mentors. Today, We've also provided training to the state agency staff who are reaching out to the skilled nursing facilities. We've developed and provided training to the skilled nursing facility staff to help them understand the vast potential of the waivers to support people in the community. Stefan was one of the earlier individuals to move out into the community. And when we went to visit him to talk to him about being a peer mentor, he said, "I've been waiting for 3 years to tell my story to other people to help them want to move out." You can see below on the screen the YouTube location of this video, and I would really encourage you to watch it. As noted earlier, Hutchinson is an ongoing case. Our current task is to do our best to meet the terms of the settlement, and we are working very, very hard to do that. Thank you so much for allowing me to share a small piece of the Massachusetts story with you. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Sandy. That was a wonderful presentation. Gabby, do we have any questions from the audience?
We do not have any questions at this point.
Well, actually, I have a couple of questions if I could ask them real quick. Sandy, what kinds of assessment tools are used to determine eligibility and to deter people from going to nursing homes rather than into their community?
PASSAR screens are provided for individuals with possible developmental disability or intellectual disability, and they're beginning for individuals with suspected emotional and behavioral health issues. There really is not a screen preventively to keep other people with brain injuries out of facilities. In terms of screening to come out, there's a clinical review by a nurse. There is a check to make sure that somebody is financially eligible for community mass health. And there's a review by a full team to consider if the individual can be safely served. And the MD HSC is used as part of that process.
Thank you. And a couple of other questions, if you don't mind. Are most people served in the group home settings or living independently?
At this point, it is about 50-50.
Okay. And how is housing paid for, which is not typically covered under the waiver programs?
Housing is the room and board. The participants need to contribute an amount. As individuals are in the community, they're responsible for their own rent. One of the wonderful things that we have benefited by having here in Massachusetts is a very strong effort to find housing and to make subsidized housing available. So we have taken full advantage of that for people finding their own homes.
We actually have a question, a follow-up question around residential, and I saw the first question, which we'll come back to, but Sandra asks also what type of, oh, that's not Sandra. We have a question about, first is, what type of evaluation tools, if any, are helping you know if the program is successful from the perspective of individuals placed in the community?
There is an annual person-centered plan, and in Massachusetts, we really rely on the participants to lead that process with the support of a case manager. So if individuals are not happy with their services, they let us know and we make adjustments. We are not doing evaluation per se of people's satisfaction, but generally speaking, our experience is that people who are not happy with their services will let us know very quickly.
And the follow-up question is, what kind of residential options are available?
There are 3 options available. One would be group homes. The second option is shared living, so living in the home of a screened provider. And the third is living in very specific sorts of assisted living facilities.
Follow-up question, do your group homes accommodate medically fragile people?
They accommodate people with nursing needs. Generally, we're not able to manage people who need, say, nursing more than once a day.
Excellent. Any more questions from our participants? No more questions.
No more questions. Well, thank you, Sandy, for the wonderful presentation. And I believe your contact information is in your presentation, or folks can contact us at NASHIA if they would like to reach out to you directly for questions. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Good deal. Good deal. Well, thank you to our audience for viewing the webinar. Please email us to join our contact list and to receive notice of future webinar offerings. To view our archived webinars and much more, please visit us at the NASHIA website. And if you're interested in joining NASHIA, which we hope that you are, please contact Lorraine Wargo, our Executive Director. We appreciate your participation. Thank you again for viewing this webinar, and please remember to complete your evaluation for us. Thank you.